In the 19 years I've been alive, one medium of art has stood out to me above the rest, and that's video games. While obviously some stories are best told as books or movies, I think in general, video games are the best method to tell a story. There's graphics, characters, controls, interactivity, and most of all, gameplay. Pretty much everything about video games fascinates me. In any game I can, I'll go into the extras and look at the concept art and model viewers and check everything out. So since video games are such a huge passion of mine, today I'm going to go through my top 10 video games of all time. I really like a lot of video games, so this list was really hard to put together. It took a long time to figure it out. And remember, this is just my opinion, my list isn't the right list, and I also haven't played every video game that's come out. If a game you really love isn't in my top 10, I might not have played it. To start off though and give you a little bit of context, I'm just going to quickfire some video games that were really formative to me when I was a little kid and pretty much made my taste what they are. The main console I played on when I was a little kid was the PS2, so I played a lot of Kingdom Hearts, Spider-Man 2 from 2004, Star Wars Battlefront 2, and the LEGO Star Wars games. In case it isn't obvious, I pretty much only played games based on existing IPs because I was a dumb little kid. But I still love these games and they're really nostalgic to me. With that being said though, let's go ahead and move on to number 1. Back when I first got my PlayStation 4, I had about 3 games to my name, and one of them was a shitty-ass basketball game. Then one day my brother walks in while I'm weeping and sobbing because all I can play is basketball, and he says, "Hey dude, I got the Uncharted collection." I looked him in the eyes and said, "Listen, Bubby, I don't know how to work a BlackBerry. What the hell is an Uncharted?" And he tells me it's like Indiana Jones, and I tried it immediately. I wasn't a big fan at first because they throw a lot of information at you. I don't know who these people are. I'm on a U-boat, this old guy got shot, and the main character is the ancestor of Sir Francis Drake, but he isn't, but maybe? But then I got into the action of the game, and it just clicked for me. I was so invested in finding El Dorado and figuring out what the whole mystery behind it was. The scope of it all and the views are so fantastic. I might be the only one who thinks this, but I've always loved the climbing in these Uncharted games. And the horror-esque sequences are so good. I was scared out of my mind. Not because that the scene in itself was scary, but because it came out of nowhere in this action game. Any action fan would love these games, and even if you don't like playing them, watch someone go through them.
You bear the mark. You are cursed. You must kiss your hand upon the stone.
Batman Arkham Knight is such a good game in the modern day. I understand it had a very rocky start back when it released in 2015, but this game was so ahead of its time. Look at how good this city is compared to Gotham Knights, which released 7 years later in 2022. These villains are probably the best iterations of these characters, give or take a few like Mr. Freeze. The idea of bringing back Scarecrow to be this game's villain is really good, especially since he hasn't been seen since Arkham Asylum. I love how grounded and gritty this game is compared to the more cartoonish Arkham City, which isn't meant to knock City, it's just different in a good way. I also don't really understand the hate towards the Batmobile. I personally like the Riddler races and challenges involving it, and the combat is fun when you equip the battle mode toggle setting. The majority of the side missions are fantastic too. You do have an odd bad one like Deathstroke, but everything else is really solid. And after 4 games of Riddler trophies, you finally get to fight the Riddler, which is so satisfying. Now I might get shit for this because this is a really hot take, but I think this game has the best iteration of the Jason Todd story. I especially appreciate the fact that he never actually died and was being mentally broken by the Joker, and I think the Arkham Knight persona is so much cooler than the Red Hood persona, but the transition between them is fantastic in this game. If you want to see me talk more about the series, comment below and I'll rank the games. Grand Theft Auto 5 is one of the most fun games that I've ever played, specifically the story. The online is great, but once you reach a certain level, the only fun you can really have is by dicking around with your friends. But the story is full of great missions that don't require other people and have great gameplay. We don't talk about that. The story is really entertaining, and it probably has one of the best driving mechanics of any game I've ever played. My only big issue is that the guns don't really feel that different, which they've improved upon in Red Dead Redemption 2. The characters are also impeccable. The main trio, Lester, Lamar, David, Steve Haynes, Amanda, Jimmy and Tracy, Laszlo, they're all so well written and acted and very entertaining to watch. I don't even want to get started on the heist because it'll make this video way too long. But I will. The story heist... Insomniac is one of the most consistent studios in video games. I don't think they've ever dropped a bad game. The only bad experience I've had with them was when I tried to play a PS3 Ratchet & Clank game on my PS Vita and it was super framey. Then in 2018, they dropped one of the hardest superhero games of all time, Marvel's Spider-Man. This game is so fantastic. When I started swinging for the first time, it felt like booting up the PS2 and playing the 2004 game back when I was a toddler, thinking, this is as good as swinging could get. I'm actually doing it. I love the story, the acting, and especially my boy Rigby. Then they did my favorite thing a game company can do, add DLC, add bonus things like suits for free, and then remaster the game, and gave it out for free with the PS5 version of the spin-off game. You cannot ask for a better situation than that. These iterations of these classic Spider-Man characters are so good too, and the ending fight against Doc Ock is so emotional, as well as the Aunt May part of the ending. Insomniac found a way to perfectly balance the intimate with the explosive. They set up the sequel so well, and I've never been more hyped for a game than I am for Spider-Man 2. And to be honest, Spider-Man 2 might be the only game that could single-handedly ruin this whole list, because it might crack the top 10. Don't worry though, if that does happen, in the Spider-Man 2 review, I'll quickly list off the new top 10 and where it fits in. Now, I know this is a scorching hot take, but I think God of War 2018 is a very average game. The story summary is good, and the characters have good moments, but I get tired of the gameplay loop with only 2 weapons, and the fists are boring. And then they double back to locations a lot. Like, they go to the mountain, and they have to go back down, and then they go back up to learn it's the wrong mountain, which really, really irritates me. We also don't get to interact with the great characters of Norse mythology that we all know, like Thor and Odin. We only get to interact with their relatives, like Baldur, Freya, and Thor's sons, Magni and Modi.
Oh no. I say when we're done.
The 2022 sequel, God of War Ragnarok, however, has only improved, and I don't think I'll ever play 2018 again. The spear is such a great addition, and the armor system has improved a lot. Odin is one of my favorite villains of all time, and Thor's arrogance and cockiness is fantastic. There are a bunch of little details sprinkled throughout the game, like how Thor doesn't drink the mead at his first confrontation with Kratos because he's trying to quit drinking for his family. And Sindri genuinely has one of the best character arcs I've ever seen in a video game, or let alone a story. The father-son dynamic is heartwarming and gets expanded from rebellion to protection in Atreus' side. The entire time you're worried that Atreus will end up following the prophecy and getting Kratos killed as a result of trying to prevent it. And speaking of, the fact that they cannot beat fate and the prophecy is either changed to be or has always been about Odin is such intelligent writing. I hope we get another game about Kratos in Egypt or some other mythology, fulfilling his prophecy at the end of the game. With all that said, Ironwood sucks and I don't give a fuck about Brock's death. Suck my ball. Go check out my previous video to see my full thoughts, but The Last of Us 2 is truly one of the greatest video game sequels of all time. I'm not going to take as long to cover this one since I already have in the past, but these are just, my shorter thoughts. The plot of the game is completely set up by the last chapter and the epilogue of the first game and expands that father-daughter relationship that we all love. The gameplay is fantastic and takes the mechanics of the first game and just adds on to it. It has a great message, great acting, and some of the most emotional scenes in gaming history that tug at your heartstrings. Any fan of the first game should definitely give this game a try. I really didn't understand why people like the Dark Souls franchise. I don't like the gameplay. I'd much rather create my own opening than wait for the enemy to provide one. It's also a very frustrating game, which I never understood the appeal of. That is until I played Cuphead. This game is so frustrating and aggravating, it makes me want to rip my fucking hair out, but the absolute rush of euphoria when I beat that dickhead Grim Matchstick is unrivaled. Fuck you, Grim Matchstick! I love everything about Cuphead. I'm a huge fan of early Disney shorts and Looney Tunes, so a hand-drawn 2D animated rubber hose game was like a magnet to me. The audio is so crusty in a vintage and nostalgic way. Studio MDHR really nailed the aesthetic. I love how almost every level is a boss. I think my favorite was Briny Beard. All the designs and power-ups are really creative, and there are plenty of different methods to beating bosses, but you have to master it one method to beat your enemies. This game is just so charming and unique, and it only gets better with the Netflix TV show. This may be a bit unrelated, but I'm super excited for Mouse, which is a similar game in a similar style coming out soon. It's a first-person shooter, which looks really nice. The DLC is up to par with the rest of the game too. It truly just makes the game longer and better. Please do me a favor, finish this video, and then go fuck up Grim Matchstick right now, for me, please. Real quick though, before I list off the top 3, I'm just going to go through some honorable mentions that couldn't make the top 10, but they stand out and I want to give a bit of attention to. Jedi Survivor and Doom Eternal are a special kind of game where you should probably play the first games of the series, but once you've played Survivor and Eternal, there's really no reason to go back to the first games. They're that good. Also just because they're complete upgrades in every way to their previous game, and I cannot recommend them enough. I also love the Resident Evil series, with my favorites being 2 and 4. I also believe Evil West is one of the most underrated video games of all time. It's very interesting, mashing up monsters with the Wild West. Crash Bandicoot is hard but very fun, it might be my favorite platformer, and TMNT Shredder's Revenge is my favorite beat 'em up of all time, and me and my brother just had non-stop fun playing it. I also love Minecraft because, who doesn't? And lastly, LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga is really, really good, and pretty much as good as the complete saga in different ways. It adds new and interesting gameplay to the old games and is super funny. But with that being said, let's move on to our topic. So parallel to video games, throughout my entire life I've been a big fan of comic books and superheroes. And I also have 3 superheroes, much like my favorite video games, who are all pretty much tied for first and keep on flip-flopping between who's my favorite and who's what, and I like them all for very different reasons. Now, one of those superheroes is Aquaman, because I think he's just the coolest one. Uncharted 4 takes the place of Aquaman when it comes to video games, because I think this is just the coolest video game that I've ever played in my life. It's such a fun game. The grappling hook makes the climbing feel so much more enjoyable, and it sort of set the trend where every game has to have a grappling hook now. I love the gunplay and hand-to-hand combat, and I truly believe it's the best Uncharted game. Throughout my first time playing the Uncharted games, I was always hoping that the main treasure Nathan would hunt for would be pirate treasure, and they finally delivered in the best way possible in this last game. The landscapes and scope of this game are almost overwhelmingly big in scale and are so exciting. Walking through the streets and buildings of Libertalia feels somewhat eerie as you're going through a ghost town, but it's also simultaneously exciting as you're living through history and anticipating more discoveries. In one of Donkey's videos, he pointed out that Henry Avery's hunt for treasure is replicated in Nathan, with the only exceptions being the time period, and that Nathan has someone, Elena, to pull him back from that ledge. The story of the game is also super well written, which isn't common in action-adventure games. The twists and turns are really fun to follow and try and figure out, and are really shocking. If you've never played this game before and still need to be convinced, play Chapter 11 Hidden in Plain Sight. It consists of all the gameplay found throughout the game, whether it be climbing, combat, driving, or puzzle solving. Another superhero alongside Aquaman tied to be my favorite is Spider-Man because of how relatable he is, and that's exactly why The Last of Us Part 1 is my second favorite video game of all time. To be honest, playing as Joel in this really dark and bleak and miserable world just trying to get by with no aspirations or ambitions was really relatable, especially with everything that happened in the year 2020. He's in such a dire world, and in an attempt to get a bit of extra money, he takes a job to escort the last hope for human survival, a task he didn't even want in the first place. During their journey, Joel bonds and practically adopts this complete dickhead teenager who slowly opens up to him as they bond during their trek across the nation. I feel like the idea of finding something to fight for just to keep going in such a dark and dangerous world is so relatable to everyone, yet cuts so deep and close to home to me. This game and the experience it gave me is almost practically irreplicable, and it's such a special game to me. It's funny because so far in this video I've probably spent the shortest amount of time talking about The Last of Us Part 1 because I can't gush about it enough without spoiling it, and I can't ruin that experience for you guys. You have to go play it for yourself. The last superhero tied for my favorite is Superman because he's a symbol of everything good and honorable. He's the gold standard of superheroes and is everything one should be. And in my eyes, Red Dead Redemption 2 is everything a video game should be, and is my favorite video game of all time. So to start off, I've never seen a character written as well as Arthur Morgan, and it's done twice over depending on your honor throughout the game. It's so dramatic and the plot is so interesting that on my first playthrough, I found myself skipping a few side missions and optional missions to keep the main story going because I was so invested. My first time playing, I missed the climax of Sadie's story, which is one of the best arcs in the game, because I desperately wanted to see the main finale of the game. This game has some of the best and most memorable and well-written characters of all time, whether it be Arthur, John, Dutch, Hosea, Colm, Sadie, Micah, Bill, Lenny. I could go on for like a half hour. This is one of the most quotable games ever and has had the most emotional impact on me of any piece of media. I wept so many times throughout this game, and it is so accessible that I played it with my mom so she could watch the story play out. And it's one of her favorite stories of all time too. This game is so big and it has my favorite open world of all time. It's so awesome. I can't believe they put this much effort into it. This world that Rockstar has created literally has everything, from dry deserts to snow-capped mountains. From swamps to muddy towns whose main attraction is just the saloon. From towns and landscapes and ranches that evoke that feeling of walking through a redwood forest. To cities featuring trolleys and trains and theaters, which is the absolute high point of civilization in this time period. I think the only game that could possibly top this one in my mind would be another Rockstar game, whether it be Grand Theft Auto 6 or Red Dead Redemption 3. I've put about 700 hours into this game, replaying it and getting the Platinum Trophy, and I don't regret a single one. I've literally bought this game 4 times across different platforms so that I could keep on playing it, and I don't regret a cent. This game is so good and important to me that I don't think I'll ever forget this game, and it's going to stick with me for the rest of my life. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of the video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did like the video, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a like and subscribe. As a really small channel, it really helps me out, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, please comment down below some of your favorite video games of all time. I'd be really interested to see that. I'll also reply to your comment and discuss them with you. Also, let me know what different topics and video games you'd like me to discuss in the future, and I'll definitely consider them. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.